Hey guys, it's Josh, and welcome back to the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad, your favorite podcast for learning how to balance between being a functional adult and a raging dumpster fire. Let's be honest, some days we're all a bit of a dumpster fire. Joining us inside the Bachelor Pad today is Katarina. Katarina, thank you so much for making time for us today. We kind of both just talked about this. This is a little late for both of us, but sometimes that's when the best conversation happens. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I was thinking actually, like, it's so late for the two of us. It's kind of like it's a late night relationship chat, I guess.
Listen, I
Yeah,
always say everybody who comes in, we're just like two friends talking over a glass of wine. So this is just like an evening glass of wine or tea before bed. Yeah,
sounds good. And I'll take that glass of wine.
perfect. So obviously the name of the show, Not So Bad Bachelor Pad. I have to ask, what is your current relationship status?
I'm married, and we are living currently in an Airbnb. So
Okay.
it's definitely a pad. I wouldn't say it's a bachelor pad because I think a woman lives here normally, but we are in Canada, like figuring out where we want to base ourselves as we tie up our loose ends in Spain, which is where we've been living now. But yeah, we're married, very happy. So
I mean, congratulations. That's great.
thank you.
And we love the fact that you have the freedom to just go from one chapter to another. Spain to Canada it's a big jump, time wise, temperature wise, and a bunch of other things. So I'm pretty sure that's been difficult to kind of settle into.
It's not been too bad. Like I used to live in Canada, so I lived there for about 5 years in Vancouver, and my husband's actually grew up in Toronto, even though he's actually from Barbados originally, but he grew up in Toronto, and we both met in London, of all places. And then I'd left Canada and I didn't necessarily want to go back. So I just did 5 years there. I was like, I want to be back in Europe, nearer to my family. And he had left Toronto being like, I don't want to be based in Canada. I want to maybe move to Latin America, maybe to Colombia or something. And so we were both in this very kind of liminal space where neither of us knew where we were going to end up. And he was on a holiday in London and I was working and living in London. And we met at a music festival and we had like 3 dates whilst he was visiting. And then we did long distance. And in that time, we were figuring out where we're going to base ourselves. And so we decided it was pretty premature to kind of commit to a place, having just kind of met and being online dating. And I'd actually just left my previous fiance. So I was kind of fresh out of a serious relationship myself. And yeah, we decided to take it slow-ish. And we did long distance for a couple of months. And I went over to see him in Toronto. And then we left. He came to London. We then left London and we actually did a couple of months in Colombia and a couple of months in Spain. Decided on Spain being the place we wanted to base ourselves. Did a year there. Decided we didn't want to stay there. And now we're back to Canada. Hopefully to stay. At least stay for a
At
few
least for a
years.
while.
Yeah, yeah.
No, listen, you're just checking things off your passport. But it's wild that you two, both from Canada, meeting in London.
I know,
And,
right?
the world is small.
I know. And the funny thing is, like, I left Canada and I was so sad to leave. I left Canada because I'd called off this engagement. My heart was broken. It was COVID. Like, my friends had all kind of left Vancouver at the time. I felt really lonely here. And I missed my family because I hadn't seen them throughout COVID. And so when I pulled off that engagement and I kind of tried to stick it out a little bit longer here, but I was like, you know what? I think it's time for me to go back to Europe. Ukraine war was like brewing, in the distance. My father lives in Ukraine. So it was just like so many things saying I should come back. So I left, came to London, and I'm not even joking. Within about 3 days of landing in London, I had this horrible sinking feeling that I'd made a big mistake. And I was like, why am I here? I missed the mountains of British Columbia. I missed the nature, the Canadian like wilderness. I missed all of that. And I started at that point making my plan of, okay, I'm not planning to stay in London. This is just a pit stop. And I'm probably going to leave. I don't know where I'm going to leave to. I don't know what I'm going to do for work. But I'm going to just ground myself here for 3 months and then plan my exit. And then I met a Canadian at a music festival. So it is very serendipitous how it all happened. But I do believe it will happen for a reason, for sure.
That actually kind of brings me into a question I wanted to ask. I can only imagine how much ending that engagement has defined a lot of moments afterwards for you in your life. What would you say has been the craziest thing you've done for love?
Hmm. That's a great question. Very good question. Well, I nearly, and I didn't, but I very nearly did convert religions for my ex-fiance. And I didn't. It's not so much that it was just came from like a different to kind of a more intense type of Christianity, really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would have been the right thing for me to do ultimately, because there was a lot of hypocrisy in terms of me actually doing it just with my life and kind of my values. Like it didn't really align, but I was prepared to try and to make that happen. Thankfully, I didn't. And thankfully, I did end up walking away from that engagement, various reasons. It's funny though, because like when I left that, I still wanted to find love. I didn't want to die alone, quote unquote.
Right.
I wanted to find love. I wanted to have a family and one day maybe get married. But it was almost like leaving that engagement was so difficult and so humbling that there was a bit of a kind of like an ego death that came with it, because it
Mhm.
just rocked my entire reality. I was in my 30s at the time. My whole timeline went out the window. It was like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. I think I just need to kind of accept that maybe I'm going to be someone who either gets married later in life or just never has kids or whatever it might be. I was not ready for a relationship. And I tell this to all my clients that I went in feeling very free, very surrendered, very connected to myself. I'd done so much work on my attachment style, on healing all of my wounds. I was feeling really good. I was feeling really stable and really solid. I did not want a relationship. I was feeling like great in myself. And I remember we'd been seeing each other for about 3 or 4 months. We got into this kind of exclusive relationship. And in my head, it felt like I'm going to take this really slow. I'm not going to rush this. I'm going to just see what happens. And it's so interesting. I remember my husband saying to me, I think we'd been together for about 4 months. And he said to me, I kind of expect to be engaged by the end of the year. And I was like, my goodness, I am not ready for that. I was so not ready for that. But then I kind of sat with it and let like that wave of fear come over me. And I just sat with it and I processed, and I was like, okay, well, he kind of has a point. Like, fair enough. At the time he was turning 40, I was 30. I think I was 32. Yeah, I think I was 32. And it was like, well, if not now, when? Right? Like, I knew myself really well. I'd been doing so much work on myself. He knew himself. And we were planning to go traveling together for like 10 months. So 24/7 being together, that I was like, I'm just going to take this risk and I'm just going to see. And in the end, we actually ended up getting married in those 10 months. And it was like a leap. It was a risk, especially after the trauma that I'd gone through of like calling everything off. But it just felt right. It was kind of like when people say, when you know. Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that. I was still scared though, right?
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
I was still scared. I remember like the morning of our wedding day, I was shaking. I was so scared. And I was so happy that he had to go first. We were watching a lot of Love is Blind at the time.
No, that's a real thing. You never know if you're gonna make it to wedding day.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
once you're there, there's still 1,000 thoughts going through your mind.
Absolutely. Like, and we'd been watching so much Love is Blind that I was just like, oh my God, I hope he goes first. I hope he goes first. I hope he goes first. He did go first. But yeah, like it was, it was scary. And so I think that's kind of the biggest leap that I've done. That's a healthy leap, right? Because I think that we can probably all look back and see unhealthy things that we've done in the name of love when we're trying to get validation, we're trying to get approval, we're trying to get someone to love us, trying to get the connection that we're craving. And we can do really unhealthy things, right? I think taking the leap though and trusting my gut and trusting that, you know what, I have done so much freaking work on myself that I can really hear my intuition and I really trust my bearings and I know I'm going to make the right decision. And following that to getting married within the year, that's definitely the biggest leap that I've done.
I mean, that is nothing short of 0 to 100.
Yeah.
Because like you said, normally people, after they call off an engagement, they need an extensive amount of time, process the breakup, to
Mhm.
really focus on themselves. And one thing that it sounds like you did that maybe a lot of other people have trouble with is and I don't know too much about the previous relationship, but it's like, it didn't seem like there was a lot of toxicity there. It seemed like you kind of knew what you wanted and what you didn't want. And you were like, hey, this is something that I don't think I'm ready for with this person. And then you made a relatively clean break. Now,
That's so
I
true.
just simplified there. I'm pretty sure there were a lot of big moments in between.
It was a horrifying break. Like it was, it's interesting because I helped my parents navigate their divorce when I was 23. I had anorexia twice in my life and I overcame that for good about 10 years ago. But calling off the engagement, even though we weren't even together all that long and the relationship was full of challenges, but it was the hardest thing I actually have done at that point because I think a lot of women can probably relate to this. It was, I was like 30, 32, I think, or like, yeah, 32 or 31. I was at that age where everyone around me was getting married. Everyone around me was planning kids. I had spent my entire life looking for love, looking for the one, looking for the guy, and I really wanted that picture perfect ending to my story. I really wanted the wedding and the dress, and I really wanted that marriage. I was so ready for that. And I was so ready to take so many kind of changes to my life to be in that relationship. We'd bought a property together. I was so excited for our future. I really, really was so excited that when it came to me, and I won't go into too much detail of what happened, it became very clear that we weren't compatible, from values, and there was lots of incompatibilities that I think I'd turned a blind eye to because I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to see them, it's like hard enough to freaking date that when you do get into a long-term relationship and you're like, you know what, actually, we can probably make this work. And we're at that age where everyone else is making it work and like, we can probably figure this out, that there is that hopefulness, right? And, and then there was a wonderful engagement and there was like, it was picture perfect and he did an amazing job at all of that. And then, we had the wedding planned and I had the beautiful dress and it was all like taking away that I really wanted it to work. But actually, throughout that engagement, I was doing so much work on myself on trying to understand what are my wounds? Where am I blocking myself? Where am I actually contributing to some of the problems that I see in this relationship? What can I take ownership over? And the more that I took ownership, the more that I actually dug deep and looked at my side of the street, the more that I realized I'm actually showing up here. I'm pretty insecurely attached. I actually have a lot of stuff that I'm projecting here. And I'm turning a blind eye to a lot of things that actually doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me. And from a values perspective, there were a lot of incongruencies. And in the end, as I got radically honest with myself, it was like, what am I doing? This is not right. And so walking away from that and taking that step was so difficult because it's kind of flying in the face of everything that we think is going to happen at that point in our lives. And yeah, it was so humbling. I spent probably the first 3 months just a hot mess, like crumpled heap in my apartment, like crying, It was hard. But then I picked myself up and did tons of meditation, tons of mindfulness, tons of therapy, tons of coaching. I had a relationship coach, I was like working with her. And I was like, I am going to figure this out. I'm not going to stop here. And even if I never get married, even if I never find love again, I want to understand, how did I get there? And how can I actually change what got me there to make me be happy and live the best life that I can, irrespective of what happens? And that's what I was really focusing on. And yeah, like 11 months later, I met my husband.
I mean, that's major. And I said this earlier, a lot of people leading up to the engagement, they would have kept turning that blind eye until after they said, I do. Who knows how long until they would
Right.
have started to actually, hey, here are some insecurities. Here are some places I'm not too confident in, and done the self-work. They probably would have waited till the relationship was really on its last leg.
Yeah.
Not even legs, but final leg, to really start looking at those things, or after the breakup. So the fact that you did that before just shows that we can save ourselves
Yeah.
so much heartbreak and so much stress if every day we really focus on getting to know ourselves
Mhm.
and just improving, so that we are living just a higher quality of life because we're happy that you're not still in that relationship unhappy or feeling like you lost a major part of yourself. For those people who may be in a relationship or they're starting to feel unsure if this is the correct path for them, do you have any advice to be like, hey, maybe this is something
Mm.
that is worth sticking out in a relationship, or no, it's time for you to move on?
That's such a great question because, I probably spent about 6 months on different forums online, like Wedding Bee and like Bridesnet, all like British websites, trying to Google the answer. Be like, okay, is it normal to have such cold feet? Is it normal to be feeling so anxious? Is it normal to be second guessing myself? Is it normal to like not trust the situation? Like I was questioning everything. And I remember I'd Google it and, half the stuff online would be like, yeah, it's normal to have cold feet. The other would be like, no, you should have full certainty. And I was like, okay, I actually don't know what I meant to feel. And it's so interesting because I actually had a guy in my group coaching program that I have say a bit of advice to another woman in the program. And he was saying to her, he was like, listen, just trust your gut. Just trust your gut. Listen to your gut and trust it. Your gut knows. And whilst that is true for someone who is very securely attached and has done tons of inner work, it's actually not that helpful advice for the majority of folks because the majority of folks don't actually know what their gut instinct is saying. We can have fear and anxiety and old, outdated stories from our childhood infiltrating our instincts and kind of clouding our gut. So actually, when you're sitting there and you're feeling a bit anxious and you're unsure about the wedding that's looming or your partner or your relationship, and you're unsure of like, do I stay? Do I go? What do I do? Like, is there something more out there for me? Like, I'm not feeling so great, but is it me? Maybe am I making this up? Maybe I'm projecting. When you follow all of that doubt, to say to someone, just trust your gut is kind of not very helpful, right? So what I always tell folks in that kind of position is there's kind of like 4 things here that you want to do. Number 1, you want to get really, really clear on where in my past was there maybe some pain from a relationship perspective. And it could be childhood, right? It could be with your parents. And where has that pain perhaps not been so fully processed, or where is that pain perhaps showing up in my present day, right? How is my past experience or my past conditioning showing up in my present day? And how is that maybe affecting how I might be feeling? So looking at that, and by that I mean like if you're feeling a little bit unsupported by your partner, well, where have you been unsupported before? Was your father maybe unsupportive? Was your mother maybe unsupportive? And how is that maybe actually still showing up in your present day? Because if it's still showing up in your present day and in how you feel with your partner, that's likely going to be an old past pain, an old wound that you want to clear up and you want to clean out and you want to overcome before you can see the relationship clearly. Because if we're walking around with a load of past pain, we're not going to see the relationship in front of us clearly. We're going to be projecting all of our past onto it, right? So it's like step number 1 is looking at where are the potentially past pains showing up right here, right now? And step number 2 is overcoming them, clearing them out, which you can do if you work with the subconscious mind. Then step 3 is going to be getting really clear on, well, what is it that I actually need to be happy long term? What are my boundaries long term? What are the different dynamics that I actually want in my relationship? And starting to kind of see, am I able to get these in my relationship? And then step number 4, can I communicate this to my partner? And can I actually create different systems to get my needs met? Until you've done all of those 4 steps, it's kind of hard to say, should I call off the wedding? Or, is this person right for me or not? Because we kind of want to go through the process unless you are truly able to declare and say, actually, this person's wrong for me. They're not good for me. They're cheating on me or whatever it might be. Then by all means, yes, you make your exit if you want to make your exit. I'm talking more about kind of when you're in that unsure place.
Right. I love the fact that you brought up a couple great points. A lot of people do say just trust your gut, or when you know, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. That advice is only applicable if there's something massive happening in the relationship, or there's a very divisive thing that's triggering something like cheating or abuse or countless other things. We know that our gut has a feeling, but we can't really interpret what that feeling is.
Right.
I was like, because anxiety and fear sometimes feel the same.
Totally.
Or, so when you don't know what you're feeling and you say trust it, that just adds more pressure to the situation, because
Exactly.
then you start second guessing yourself like, okay, I have this feeling. Is this feeling telling me to go, stay? And then you're like dragging your feet, and all of a sudden
Exactly.
so much time has gone by and
Exactly.
that you might not still have the clarity.
Exactly. 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 If you have a fear of intimacy, which I would argue a lot of people do, right? You have a fear of intimacy, the wedding day is looming or commitment's looming. Of course, you're going to get cold feet. You have a freaking fear of intimacy. And again, I would argue a lot of people already have that. And so trusting your gut at this point of, well, I'm freaking out and I'm feeling really bad. And your brain is going to start telling stories. It's going to find tons of reasons of why you should leave. It's going to find tons of reasons of why this person's actually a threat. It's literally just your amygdala firing off, perceiving this threat of intimacy because you're getting nearer to the wedding day, you're getting nearer to commitment. So of course it's going to be presenting you with a ton of reasons of why you should leave. That doesn't mean you have to listen to it. That's just maladaptive programming, right? So the gut, which lies beneath all of that, kind of the pure spiritual essence of who you are, the authentic self, that part of you will know. But most people aren't connected to that unless you're meditating, for hours on end. And even during my first engagement, I was meditating for like 30 minutes every day. I was a mindfulness teacher. I was doing all this work. I was taking plant medicine. Like I was so deep. And even then, it took me about a year to really hear my gut, to like really hear it and trust it. Yeah, it takes a while.
Listen, I was like, you were preaching to the choir. We've had many, many moments where we are unsure what our body's telling us to do.
Yeah.
So we take the best guess on to what to do. And sometimes it worked out. Sometimes we've ended up in just not great situations.
Yeah.
But you're right. The more time you take actually undoing the inner work, investing in yourself, the clearer that voice becomes. Now, you kind of touched on it, but I want to see if you have a more specific answer too. I always like to say, is there a relationship or dating stereotype that you encourage your clients to break in order to maintain a healthy relationship?
Yeah. Do you mean when they're out there dating, or do you mean when they're in the relationship?
We can go before and during.
Yeah. I think the biggest stereotype that I see being really problematic, and I see this with men and with women, and I see this in the relationship as well, is when there is this wearing of like a mask. And it's
Okay.
very insidious, right? Like with women, what I see is women will be on the dating apps, they'll be out there dating, and they want to present, and I used to do this myself, they want to present a like put together image, right? A put together persona, the persona who is high functioning and probably really smart and probably has like a great job and is really go-getting and really dynamic and really fun and really extroverted and like really, bubbly and all these wonderful things. And so as women, we can present that and put that into the profile and get out there and be that way on dates. And then you're that way into the relationship. And then you're showing up as this kind of like a really great girlfriend. And that's lovely. And what's beneath that, right? Like what's beneath that? And I know for me, it took me about 2.5 years with my ex-fiance before I actually realized like, holy cow, I'm kind of performing this whole time. And even though, I'd cry, I'd have my down days, I'd have my lazy days, I'd have my days when like I'd have, anxiety, whatever it might be, something would happen or like stress about work. But even with that, there wasn't really any actual non-performativity. Like I think, when we had some of our worst arguments, sure. But it was really after it ended that I actually started to really dig deep into like, well, who am I really? And it's so interesting because where I am with my husband right now is so different to how I was back then because I've broken through so many of those wounds. And I see it with men too, right? With men, it's very similar. And this kind of performativity of like, well, I got to be the funny guy. I got to be the guy who's got like his life together. The guy who's got like a really good job, like a really good home, who's got his like car, who's got like a plan for himself and put together and funny. It's the same thing.
I've always said this, I think even since the beginning of the show, is a relationship built on stage will only last so long. You know, even the greatest plays have to come to an end.
Totally.
You can only play a role so long before two things happen. Either you lose yourself or you have this big disconnect with your partner. Because when you perform so long, you start to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, is this really me? Or how did we get here?
Yeah.
And then if you don't have that moment, or you haven't had that moment yet, or you have that, you question yourself, there are so many times you'll start to bicker with your partner, or just because there's that dissociation of the person that you played for so long to get them, whether that's the put together businessman or the playboy, whatever role you're playing. I was like, you can only do that so long before your authentic self starts to slip out.
Totally.
And then it causes these waves, these ripples in your relationship.
And the worst thing is precisely that. Like, the worst thing is, if you're showing up, or like if I'm showing up a certain way, for example, in a relationship, right? Or let's say you're showing up in a certain way in a relationship, it's so insidious, you're probably not even going to be aware that there's a performativity. That's what I found, that like people come to like, no, I'm being really authentic, this is who I really am. And I'm like, I don't doubt that that's who you really are, sure. And you're still trying that little bit more. You're still presenting that little bit more. You're still filtering and censoring yourself that little bit more. Unless you are being so vulnerable and so radically honest and so open and transparent and showing yourself all the ugly sides, all the shadow of you, all the warts, all like the parts of you that you're like, oh, I don't want anyone to see that. Until you're showing someone the full extent and range of your shadow, you are performing, right? Like, it's very insidious. And the problem is, when you build a relationship on performativity, on showing up a certain way or filtering certain things or censoring yourself because you're afraid of them leaving you, or you're afraid of upsetting them, or you're afraid of being too much, or you're afraid of like not being enough, whatever it might be, then they're only getting a very two-dimensional version of you. And like you said, that's hard to maintain, but it also means that when you're through the honeymoon stage and you start entering the power struggle, and you get tired of keeping that image, and the parts of you, the shadow, the deeper, more vulnerable parts do start to kind of seep out, because they will, then it's like you're with a whole different person. And I often would hear this, actually, that clients come to me, they're like, yeah, it's, after a couple of years, this person is transformed into someone else. And I'm like, well, they probably are someone else, because they've been presenting this whole time, right? And so have you, and that's how you attracted them. Because two people behaving that way are going to attract each other. Yeah.
Let me ask this question first. What is your favorite way to show intimacy between you and your husband?
There's going to be different ways, I think. And I think it depends on where we're at in our lives. Like, right now, we're in a bit of a limbo period where he's been figuring out his like visa, because we were in Europe and now we're back in Canada. And I think he'd agree with this. It's just creating the most safety and acceptance that I can in the container of our relationship, right? So creating the safe space where he can come to me as he is, with whatever he has, as vulnerable as he needs to get. And there's just this like safe, loving, non-judgmental space. And truly, he creates the same for me. So that's
And
the
that's a balance.
intimacy.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we all should strive for in our relationships.
Yeah. It's taken a while to create, though, because like, I don't think I've ever really had this in relationships. Like, I would come to exes definitely with some vulnerability, or, a problem, or maybe like I'm nervous or anxious about X, Y, and Z, but it was always a different, like, now it's such a different level of vulnerability. And it helps that with the work that I do, I'm often drilling down on myself as well, and getting really deep into my own shadow, and making art and creativity out of the personal growth and the relational growth that I teach and work in. And we get to play in that space. So it kind of forces us to be intimate. in a way that maybe I didn't get to do previously. But really it's about, being seen and being safe and being accepted.
Oh, I love that. And because we talked about having these blocks, having these insecurities can hinder and keep us from achieving our dream relationship. How does facing these blocks not only help clear up some of the emotional intimacy connections, but physical intimacy connections as well?
Yeah, really, really, really good question. So imagine you've got blocks, right? And like I'd say probably like the average person that I work will come to me with like probably 15 to 20 clear root level blocks. And a lot of them will be interconnected. I think when I started doing this work, I think I had probably like 20, 25. It's pretty normal to have a lot. They're going to be lumped together. So with me, for example, if my blocks were around being alone, around being abandoned, there was all kind of fear of being abandoned, right? Because my dad was traveling and working a lot throughout my childhood. Like my biggest block is so interesting was that I'm actually just a bad person, which sounds so dramatic, but actually it's a really common one, super common. Most insecurely attached folks will have this in some shape or form. It might show up as like being defective or being a variation of it's like not being good enough. For me, there was just kind of like, I guess it's kind of underlying fear that I'm going to get found out, that I'm somehow bad or that I've done something bad. And if I trace it back to my childhood, it makes sense. I was born in a foreign country. I came to England when I was 4 years old, and I was bullied in the playground because I was like the foreign kid. I didn't speak English. I was kind of like really pointed out. And so as a little kid, the conclusion that I made in my brain, because children are very egocentric, they make everything about themselves. It's how their brain develops and how they learn about the world. The conclusion I made about myself was that like, well, I'm getting picked on because I must be bad. I must just be a bad kid. There must just be something wrong with me. And so my belief from that very young age was that like, I'm bad and I'm going to be alone and abandoned because I'm bad. And that explains why my father's like away all the time. Then my mum would come home and she'd be really tired and stressed because she'd been working this job in an English speaking country and she barely speaks English. So she'd be like yelling at me because she's really stressed. And so I would take that as, well, now I'm getting criticized. I grew up in this kind of cocktail of, and don't get me wrong, my parents are amazing parents. Like this all happens even in the most loving home, right? But the experience that I kind of got was that on some fundamental level, I am bad or I've done something bad or there's something wrong with me. And that's why people don't want to be my friend. That's why I'm getting, my mom's coming home and yelling at me. That's why like, I don't have friends in the playground, etc. And so that belief or that kind of wound, that block stayed with me throughout most of my life. And it's so interesting how it kind of, I'm not going to go into it now, but like how it kind of shaped a lot of my life and the things that I did. How it would show up in intimacy is that if there's a belief that I'm going to be bad or that I'm not good enough or that I'm going to be abandoned or that I'm going to be criticized, well, of course I'm going to be a perfectionist. Of course I'm going to be performing. Of course I'm going to try and be the type A-star student, the picture perfect, like I'm perfect, I'm perfect, I'm perfect. That was like my persona for so much of my life. It was, I have to be perfect, I have to be the best, I have to work really hard, I have to get the grades, I have to be thin, I have to be X, Y, and Z to fit in and to be accepted, right? Because beneath it all, there's this like deep-seated fear of like, what if I'm just bad? And so in intimacy, how that shows up is like, well, I'm performing the whole time. I'm going to show up being a perfectionist. I'll never forget, I was with the marriage counselor, with my ex-fiance, we were like doing marriage counseling, and I was crying and, I'm sitting there being like, I'm breaking. I'm being so vulnerable here. And the marriage counselor looked at me and he was like, but you don't look all that vulnerable. He's like, your makeup's still pretty perfect. You're still dressed really well. Like you're still really put together, Kat. And he was like, you're always so put together. And I remember thinking like, does he not get it? I'm like falling apart here. In retrospect though, there was still an element of performativity because if I'd been really vulnerable and really honest, I probably would have been like screaming at that point and I probably just like run out the room, right? If I'd really got deep to what was going on for me. And so these different blocks are going to be hindering intimacy in so many ways, whether it's that you're afraid of being smothered because actually maybe your parents are really, really like smothering and, needy parents, and you grow up like fearing the fact that you're going to lose your identity and you're not going to have any freedom, and you're going to feel trapped and you're going to feel powerless because actually everyone's like smothering you and telling you what to do. And so you grow up and you're like pushing love away, or you grow up being like, I just don't feel good enough and I have to perform, I have to be a perfectionist, I have to like constantly strive to do more, whatever it might be. These are all different mechanisms to protect ourselves, to protect the vulnerable childlike parts of ourselves, and they push intimacy away. And from a physical perspective, what I've seen a lot of is with men, specifically my male clients, is that when there is a fear or a block that they're not good enough or that they are somehow powerless, that's a really big one, that they're powerless, right? They don't have any power. Like physically, like in intimacy, it's really hard to show up and to relax or to perform because there's so much pressure and weight on you and so much fear of rejection, of being exposed, being found out.
Totally.
Right? And so it really is about clearing those blocks so that you can reclaim your freedom and reclaim your worth and know that you are enough. You don't have to perform.
It's such a simple message, and I've reiterated this countless times that bachelors, bachelorettes, like even people in a relationship, listen, you are perfect the way you are. Your flaws help define your character, which the right person will fall in love with. And that's not to say that we shouldn't keep working on ourselves, because we should. Self-development is a journey that doesn't have a finishing point. You know, there's always something that we can tweak or improve on or focus on so that we are living truly our best life. But we can't be so caught up in a performance or trying to attract people that we start to cover up these flaws, or we don't properly support them. Because if we treat ourselves like a house, don't really do any structural work, we just keep slapping coats of paint on top of it, that only lasts so long before the foundation starts to crumble. And we talked about this last season. It's easier to do little bits of maintenance here and there than to wait until you completely come crashing down and try to rebuild your core, yourself.
Absolutely. 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 It's so much better just to chip away. And the work, it's so funny how we call it work, right? Like the inner work. That's something actually my husband and I were talking about. He's like, oh, stop calling it inner work. You know, I do believe it can actually get really fun. I've been doing this now for like 17 years. I'm not even kidding. Some useful, some less useful. Like I spent a lot of that time in therapy, which I didn't find all that helpful. The really deep stuff I'd say I've been doing for the last decade, and then like seriously deep for the past 4 years, I'd say. And it's addictive. Once you start and you start seeing the results, and you know, if you're an entrepreneur, you start seeing like your money literally increase because you're working through blocks. It gets very addictive. Or like with me, you know, being happily married. It's like, wow, how good can this get? Like, this is really cool. I've never had love like this. Yeah, it's addictive.
So many people, sorry to interrupt. I love hearing you say that, because so many people, especially when they're first starting on their self-development, self-discovery journey, and they want to work with a coach or they want to go to seminars and stuff, they're like, they see the price tag. That's what they see. And I don't know about you, but I know just on my journey to find peace with myself and to get my emotional and mental state ready to start coaching other people, I've invested thousands of dollars into myself, so that, like I said, not even for other people, but it really does benefit you so much. And I can't be mad at the price tag, because you can't really put a number to emotional stability.
No,
because like
absolutely.
you said, your business started to click. You found a more fulfilling relationship. I mean, really, what's the price of a happy life? You just can't put a price tag on it.
Absolutely. And when you're in that happy relationship, like so much opens up, right? I remember when I was doing a lot of coaching of single folks. Now I work with single people and with people who are in relationships. And someone had said to me, I think it was my business coach, who was like, you know, how much would you have paid to meet your husband? And I remember thinking like, okay, let me actually put a price tag on that. It would be like well over 100K, truly, because actually I didn't want to wait any longer to meet my person. I really didn't. I was again in my 30s. I was like, now's the time. I literally have like double my income since being married to him because he's been such a rock and so supportive, and my nervous system has calmed down. I've had the freedom to work through so many more blocks. And when you're in a healthy relationship, so much of the rest of your life is also going to improve because emotionally and spiritually, you've leveled up. You've gone to another layer of healing that you actually can't do when you're single. So it's like price of getting there is priceless, truly. And absolutely, like, best and biggest investment that you will ever make, in my view, is on your mental well-being, on your emotional well-being, because that's the faculty that's going to allow you to generate more wealth or live longer or, have the career or find the partner. Like, that's the most important stuff that you can invest into. And the results can be really quick. They can be really quick. When you have the right tools, like, it can be insane exponential growth.
Guys, it's not just me saying it. The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
Kat has told you her story, where she's come, where she's at now. If my words aren't enough, here's another first person's account to lean on to start your journey today. Whether, like I said, whether that's with me, whether that's with Kat, whether that's just getting a book. There's so many ways that you can get started. Now, you have your own podcast as well. You have your own show.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to talk about that, but I think this is a great way to segue into it. And that is, we ask a lot of questions. We've talked about a lot of topics. Is there a topic that on your show you haven't had a chance to cover, but it's something that you've just been itching to tell people, or you think is really important and more people need to hear about?
Good question. I actually really want to interview my old family lawyer who helped me separate with my ex-fiance, just because I remember when I went to her, she had so many cases of divorce. And I know it's such like a dark and sad topic, but I like research. I like data. And I like to know, why are people getting divorced? Why are relationships falling apart? Where are people tripping up? And then in following the data, it's like, okay, well, let's learn about this and avoid that from happening, right? Let's solve for it proactively. It's something that actually, when I came into the relationship with my husband, I was so meticulous about, like, okay, we have to do our relationship practices. We have to be very conscious about this. And here are the boundaries. And like, there's not going to be any lying or any kind of hiding from each other. Like, if there's any discomfort, we have to share it with each other. We have to be transparent. Like, we really have to put our best foot forward here to make this work and treat this with the dignity and the respect and the grace it deserves, the relationship. So I'd love to kind of unpack where relationships fall apart more. That would be really interesting. And then the other thing, but this is, again, going down a dark rabbit hole here.
We love rabbit holes. Go ahead. Dive in.
Oh, it's so dark though. So a lot of the people I work with have either committed or experienced infidelity. And that's something that I experienced in previous relationships. My parents had that, like my dad had an affair. And so having been on the receiving end, I've never committed infidelity, but having been on the receiving end, it is cripplingly hard, right? And it's so interesting how, as I'm coaching these days, probably 6 out of 10 people who come to me have cheated on their partner and the rest have been cheated on. And it's so fascinating holding the lens or kind of holding the space of a coach and being very loving and compassionate and accepting and curious about the experience and what led you here and how did it happen and what needs weren't getting met and what we're getting out of this experience, and really kind of unpacking the different steps that someone has to go through before they kind of resort to that. Because ultimately it's an act of survival, right? Like, no one goes into infidelity thinking like, oh, this is going to be a great idea. No, it's like a desperate act because like you're unhappy or your needs aren't getting met. So I find that area so fascinating, not from a kind of, like literally just from a kind of like anthropological point of view of like, this is really interesting how we've been as humans so poorly educated on how to run a relationship that people simply actually don't know. A lot of the time there's no manual. And so if you're not happy and you're locked in, like I had a woman come to me the other day who's been married for 8 years, 2 kids. The marriage has been tanking for the past 2 years. Like, it's not going very well. And she came to me and she was like, I think my only option is to have an affair. And I'm like, it's not your only option. And it's kind of heartbreaking that that's where your head is at, right? So let's work on that. Yeah, it's fascinating.
No, yeah. I mean, when people feel like they have no other options but the most destructive path, it really is heartbreaking sometimes. But I love that bit of darkness because sometimes the darker the thought, the brighter the light, you
Yeah,
know? So sometimes it takes us having these moments where we feel hopeless, powerless, helpless, like there's no other alternative that will lead us to a breakthrough. And that breakthrough, like I said, sometimes it's worth all the stuff that you have to go through
yeah,
to get there.
yeah,
Otherwise, you would have never taken the time to do the work.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. 100%.
Are there any last minute topics that you really want to talk about before we have to go our separate ways?
Yeah, no, I just like, thank you so much for having me here. It's, it does feel like a little like late night kind of little
Yeah,
chat. Yeah.
it's the best. Sometimes you get a little bit of sleep depravity that
Mhm.
spurs, creativity, or there's just no stress. The day is done, you're unwinding,
Yeah.
and it's easier to flow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. And like, what a perfect topic, right? The kind of
Yeah.
thing that you'd be talking about with friends. And like you said, a glass of wine or a bottle of wine.
Well, Kat, thank you so much for making time today. Let us know, where can we listen to your show? Where can anybody who has more questions or feel like they're ready to do some work to get rid of those blocks find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on www.katarinapolonska.com. I tend to be on LinkedIn as my social media platform. So you can just find me, Katarina Polonska. I think if you type in the science-backed relationship coach on there, you'll find me, and drop me a DM. Literally just drop me a DM. Tell me a little bit about where you're at, what you are experiencing, where you'd like to get to. And we can just have like, I talk to everyone that I work with. There's no kind of weird like sales assistant or, any of that. Like, it's literally just me.
Good, good.
I have to like put it right. So yeah, drop me a DM on there. You can find me on Instagram as well at Katarina Polonska. I'm just not that active on there, but if you do DM me, I will reply.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for making it through another episode of the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad. You know where to find Kat. I'm going to make sure I leave all her links down below if you are watching on YouTube. If you are listening over the sound waves, don't forget to like this episode as well. Give it 5 stars. Leave a review with a question for me or for Kat, and that will just get the conversation going. And then I will see all you amazing bachelors and bachelorettes next week for another episode.